Petco has been doing some pretty diabolical stuff for years. They've been selling beta fish in tiny cups and housing their in-store reptiles in pretty questionable enclosures, which give new pet owners the wrong idea. But their fantastic new idea is one of the most misleading things I've seen them do, all for the sake of a quick buck. So let's talk about Petco's new desk pets. Now, I want to preface, as you can probably tell, I am from the UK, so all of the info and footage about desk pets is from sources that I found online. I haven't been in person. If you are from the US though, and you have seen these stalls, then I would encourage you to leave further info in the comments or share your experience. But with that being said, let's get right into the purpose of today's video. So at this point, you're probably wondering, what actually is a desk pet? Why is everyone talking about them? So essentially, Petco has created a stall near the checkout line within all of their shops. And it's a very controversial way to sell animals because it encourages impulse buying. That's what they want you to do. They want you to go, oh, I'll take a Pac-Man frog too, and put that in your car and be on your way. They are marketing them as low maintenance, live on your desk, you don't have to do very much sort of pet. And the containers that they're selling them in are very small and definitely not permanent enclosures. In fact, one crazy thing about Petco's desk pets, they are going against their own care guides online. They're not following their own care standards. And some other issues that have arose are things like theft. Anyone could steal this animal. This animal could be misplaced in the store, it could get lost, it could get pushed underneath a shelf, never to be seen again. People can pick them up and shake them around. So one thing everyone is wondering is how Petco even allowed this to happen. But it all comes down to one thing really, and that is money. They want to make money. They are a business. And it's really disappointing to see these huge corporations unravel all of the hard work that us pet creators have been doing online. Because whether you like it or not, chain pet stores are the face of the reptile and amphibian world, since they are perhaps probably the most accessible place that you can get these animals from. The general public may not even know that there are exotic animal specific stores out there, and that they even exist, and that Petco's husbandry standards are very outdated, from what I can see anyway. It's unfortunate that the most accessible shop is treating their animals like just another item in the store, when there are family-run businesses out there striving to provide the best for their animals, but are having to close down simply because they don't get the same amount of footfall as these chain pet stores, and they just can't afford to stay open. And then Petco is over here thriving while marketing animals like they're a new pencil holder, especially within the era that we're in now, where exotic pet keeping is at risk of being banned. It is so frustrating to see these huge corporations feed into the idea that us exotic pet owners don't provide our animals with what they truly need, and we don't value our animals. Because the thing is, the people who actually are a part of the reptile and amphibian community know that this is no way to sell, market, or keep living animals. But with that being said, let's talk about the main three species that we are seeing on these desk pet stands, starting with the invertebrates. Petco are mainly selling jumping spiders and tarantulas, and here's why this has been so controversial. Tarantulas especially are notoriously fragile, and even a simple mistake like dropping the container could mean that they would pass away. That's why responsible pet stores typically keep their tarantulas locked away behind glass so that they are inaccessible without assistance. One problem I have with impulsively buying exotic pets is they live significantly longer than you would think. Tarantulas especially can live for a very long time. If you get a female tarantula, they could live up to 20 years depending on the species. And the majority of tarantula species that Petco are selling do actually get quite big. So you will have just impulsively purchased an animal that is extremely fragile, might live for ages and could take up more space than you were expecting. And there's not a single preface on the packaging other than "This is not my forever home" in the tiniest writing. Yeah, that is definitely not a forever home for a tarantula. This is how I like to keep my tarantulas for reference. I'm mainly going to focus on my Mexican red knee just because that's like the it tarantula that people tend to go for. But I like to use acrylic or glass enclosures with cross ventilation to create good airflow and prevent mold. I also like to give them very deep substrate for burrowing and tunneling, and I'll provide them with things like cork tubes and branches for webbing or further den making. And of course, they have access to a small water bowl. I typically don't use heat for my tarantulas as my animal room is usually very warm, but some people do like to use heat mats on the side of their enclosure if they live in a cooler climate. Some other things to keep in mind when it comes to keeping tarantulas is that they are not a handling pet. This is not a pet that you can hang out with. And I feel like this needs to be explained to someone before they buy a tarantula, because like I said, something as simple as the tarantula falling or dropping the enclosure could kill them, especially when they're molting. If you were to drop a bug in whilst they're in the middle of molting, even a simple tap could cause your tarantula to pass away. That's why we suggest waiting about 48 hours until after they've molted to feed them. As mentioned, Petco are also selling jumping spiders. And honestly, I don't deny that these are fantastic pets that can fit on a desk. And they're definitely a great option if you want to get into exotic pet keeping or invert keeping. They are brilliant. But like the other species mentioned in this video, they too have their own specific care requirements and needs that need to be met. And those needs aren't being met within Petco's example enclosures or enclosures that they're being sold with. Now, I don't personally keep jumping spiders anymore, but I had jumping spiders for many years. So I thought I'd walk you through the sort of setup that I used to house my jumping spiders in. You want to use a tall acrylic or glass enclosure with cross ventilation. The enclosure should also be front or bottom opening rather than top opening, as this could disrupt their webs. They also need lots of climbing opportunities like cork bark, branches, and vines. Jumping spiders surprisingly have amazing eyesight, so you should give them that enrichment and stimulation. They will benefit from it. They also need multiple anchor points at the top of the enclosure, like I said, to make their web and create hammocks. They need a slightly moist area and regular misting to provide adequate drinking opportunities. And one thing that jumping spiders love that Petco are not providing are bright lights. They really like bright LED lamps, and in fact, some jumping spiders won't show natural behaviors if they aren't in a bright space. Some other things to keep in mind when it comes to keeping jumping spiders. Yes, online you see lots of videos of them being super friendly and like walking onto people's hands and interacting with their owner. That isn't really my experience. I had Tapioca who was super friendly, but Boba was kind of crazy. He was really fast and he would bolt sometimes, so don't expect to have that sort of relationship with your jumping spider. They are animals at the end of the day, and sometimes they just don't want to be around people. They see you as a predator. And compared to tarantulas and the other animals that Petco are selling on their desk pet stall, jumping spiders don't live for a very long time. So you could have the opposite problem here, where you get really excited, you bring this pet home, and if they're already an adult, you might only have them for another few months, max a year. And if they're a baby, they're going to be significantly harder to feed, and you have to keep a really close eye on them because they can like drown in water droplets. So again, for an animal that is so fragile, it really should not be kept at the checkout of a pet store. Now, we spoke about the invertebrate section of Petco's desk pet stand, but the main complaints that I have been seeing have not been about the inverts, which still deserve talking about, obviously. The main complaints I've been seeing are about Pac-Man frogs. Young Pac-Man frogs are adorable. They are tiny, they are cute little meatballs like the size of a 50p coin. They can have these lovely bright colors and they're really fun to feed. Like, who wouldn't want this adorable little frog? However, in less than 6 months, that tiny little frog can grow to be one of the largest frog species on Earth. Pac-Man frogs get huge, especially females, and there is no way that an adult enclosure would comfortably sit on your standard desk. In fact, I would be worried that the desk would collapse from the weight of the enclosure and all of the substrate that they need. Maybe not quite as heavy, but it's like having a large fish tank on your desk. You need to make sure it's got adequate support. And of course, like the other animals sold on this desk pet stand, amphibians are incredibly fragile. Their permeable skin can make them pass away pretty quickly if they come into contact with even just chlorinated water. They also have large bone structures, which means that they need things like calcium and UVB to prevent deformities and metabolic bone disease. They can also quickly become impacted if they don't have the right heat source. I could go on and on. But the moral of the story here is that Pac-Man frogs are definitely not a desk pet. And I think that the way that people talk about Pac-Man frogs may have contributed to the way that they are marketed at Petco. Some people label them as low maintenance and even boring, like they're a pet rock. But just because an animal is a sit and wait hunter doesn't mean that they deserve less than. We should still strive to provide the best for our animals, whether they travel miles a day or they just sit in a pile of dirt. These frogs should not be kept in plastic containers on a desk. But now that I've got my feelings out of the way about that, I want to walk you through my enclosure for my Pac-Man frog. So let's meet Big Mac and have a rundown of his enclosure. Big Mac has got a 60-gallon enclosure. It is 2 foot by 2 foot. He's got 6 inches of substrate, and his substrate is a soil mixture. He also has a drainage layer so the soil doesn't become waterlogged, and he's got leaf litter on the top to help retain humidity. His enclosure is fully bioactive, so it's got live plants, it's got a cleanup crew, and it's got plenty of shade for him to hide away. Pac-Man frogs also need a large water bowl that they can completely soak and fit in. This is essential for their skin health and for their bowel movements. To keep humidity up in his enclosure, he's got an automatic misting system that goes off every 8 hours. And he's got a 25-watt eco halogen lamp to provide a drier, warmer area within the enclosure. As I said, these frogs have very big bone structures and they need calcium within their diet, but they cannot synthesize that calcium if they don't have UVB. These things work hand in hand. So he's got a 2.4% UVB unit to prevent metabolic bone disease, and then the last piece of lighting equipment is just a plant light for the plants. This is the sort of enclosure that you should be aiming for an adult Pac-Man frog. People tend to keep them in enclosures that are a lot smaller than this because they say they don't move around very much. But if you provide your frog with the space, they honestly will use it. It just might take them a couple days or a couple weeks to go and explore the new area. A good enclosure is all about giving your animal the choice, the option to choose to do something. Don't take away that option because you think they might not opt to use it. Now, some things to keep in mind when it comes to owning a Pac-Man frog is, again, this is not a handling animal. The oils from our skin or even the plastic from the gloves can be very harmful to the frog, so it's important to only pick them up when necessary. Pac-Man frogs also have very strong jaws and very big teeth. Their bites can do some serious damage and they can really hurt. So take precaution and use tongs when feeding, especially if this frog is for your child, which I wouldn't really recommend anyway. And if you are at Petco, you might as well pick up some Reptisafe too, because these frogs cannot handle chlorinated water. It needs to be dechlorinated to ensure that it's safe for them to sit in, soak in, mist the enclosure with, everything. You need to make sure there's no harmful chemicals in that water. But as frustrating as the desk pet situation is, remember who to be angry at. This is not a representation of the exotic pet community. This is just a large corporation doing what they do best, which is making money unethically. So next time you find yourself disappointed in a chain pet store, instead turn your focus to uplifting this amazing community that we have and the community-run exotic pet stores in your area. I know that chain pet stores can be cheaper, but at what cost? It's worth paying the extra few pounds or few dollars at the family-run pet store down the road if it means keeping the exotic pet community ethical and responsible. Like I said earlier, if you have any more information about this situation that I can't really get here in the UK, then comment it down below, share your experience, share your knowledge, and let me know if any Petcos in your area are doing anything about this, because I know from Mzotic's video, some stores are choosing to not participate, which is fantastic. And that's exactly what we need from Petco employees. They need to be turning around and saying, you know what? We're not doing this. So the most important thing you can do is just not buy the animals. Remember that buying animals from chain pet stores is not rescuing them. You can ask to take them for free, and if they'll give them to you, then that's great, but fortunately, it's best to just leave them there. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all later. Bye-bye.